Now, something else that Jesus talks about is the parable in chapter 22. It's still dealing with the kingdom, but it's dealing with a different level of the kingdom or a different aspect of the kingdom in regards to rebellion. So let's read that first parable in chapter 22.
All right, starting in verse 1. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent out his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding feast, and they were unwilling to come. Again he sent out other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fattened livestock are all butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast.' But they paid no attention and went their way, one to his own farm, another to his business, and the rest seized his slaves and mistreated them and killed them. But the king was enraged, and he sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main highways, and as many as you find there, invite to the wedding feast.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered together all they found, both evil and good, and the wedding hall was filled with dinner guests. But when the king came in to look over the dinner guests, he saw a man there who was not dressed in wedding clothes. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you come in here without wedding clothes?' And the man was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, 'Bind him hand and foot, and throw him into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.'"
Right, so in this story we have a situation where, once again, we have a kingdom, and we have a wedding feast that's happening, and basically what's happening at the wedding feast is that the people who are invited to the wedding feast are being asked to celebrate the union of the hierarchy to the things that carry the hierarchy. And so you can think about this, because what you have is you have a king whose son is being married. And in the biblical imagery and in ancient world imagery, what you have is that the son represents the father, and the bride always represents the physical side of things, so the people or earth. And so what you have is a people who's being asked to come and to celebrate the hierarchy and the hierarchy applied to them. And what's happening is that these people are finding reasons not to go there, not to celebrate the hierarchy. They're not finding the hierarchy worthy of their celebration, worthy of the sacrifice that's required in order to celebrate something. Now, most of us have been in hierarchies where we don't feel like celebrating the hierarchy that we're in. So, a lot of this happens for a lot of us in kind of the jobs we have, at least at the beginning of our careers. So did you ever have a job that was particularly felt unworthy of celebration, at least the hierarchy that you worked in?
I lasted a month at Whataburger, and it was...
Wow, a whole month.
Well, and even though I lasted a month, the smell of mustard and pickles and onions on my clothes and on my fingers lasted far longer.
Nice. So what was it about that job that you didn't care for?
There were some parts that were menial and stuff like that, but I was young enough that I don't think I felt it was beneath me or anything like that. But I had an assistant manager who was not the greatest, didn't have my best interest, and asked me to do things that would not earn the approval of the general manager, and then kind of, when that didn't go well, it was all of me.
Okay. So basically you worked in a hierarchy that was
dysfunctional.
That was disintegrated, we can say.
We could say that, yes.
Okay. And now, did you ever work in a situation where the hierarchy was integrated, you just didn't care for it?
I don't think I've had that opportunity, actually.
Okay. I remember, for me, it was working at JB's, and I didn't want to. They had a mission of serving food to guests, and I really wasn't too interested in that mission, and so I didn't make the best employee ever, we can say. But what happens here is we have a situation where inside of the hierarchy, people aren't finding they're not finding the hierarchy something to be celebrated and enjoyed. It's not worth whenever you celebrate or enjoy something, there's an element of sacrifice that's required. You have to make time to do that. Sometimes you have to go someplace to do that. Maybe you have to provide something to do that. Imagine going to a 4th of July picnic, right? You have to take time out. You could be working that day. You have to say, I'm not going to work. You have to maybe bring fried chicken or something, dessert, whatever it is that you bring. You're part of this celebration, and you bring stuff. You barbecue hamburgers maybe or something like that. So the thing that is at issue here is that they don't find the hierarchy worth celebrating. Now, what is the reaction of the king to this scenario?
He's enraged, I think it says, actually, and
Right.
and goes and destroys them.
Right, and that seems kind of over the top for us, right? Now, the question is, why is it that the king destroys them? What would? It seems like an overreaction to us. Can we look at it in a way that sees it as not something that's too much?
I mean, I guess if you compare it to maybe the work atmosphere again, and if you've got some disgruntled employees who are not happy with the company and stuff like this, it might be better just to let them go before their opinion spread.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. The thing is that let's say again you have a situation where you're on a sports team, and if somebody doesn't care to be doing that, isn't putting in any effort, isn't performing, isn't what coach in their right mind would keep that guy? And that's the interesting thing about these parables is that when we look at these parables, it's instructive for us to see that there's always an exclusion, a throwing out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, a destruction. And we can say, well, the destruction seems too harsh, but in reality, if the hierarchy contains everything, what other way is there to exclude somebody from it, right? If you work for McDonald's, the guy can fire you. You can go work for someone else, and you're not part of the McDonald's hierarchy. But if the hierarchy that you're a part of, it contains everything, then
You can't be fired.
you can't be fired. There's only one remedy for that problem. And so it's really interesting. It's very instructive for us to see this and to say, well, if God's hierarchy contains everything, well, what else would he do? What else could he do? Because we don't relate this lack of enjoyment and celebration of the hierarchy as rebellion, but it's exactly what it is. It's the Tower of Babel. What are all these people doing? They're saying, whatever I'm doing has more value than this hierarchy that you've created, this kingdom that you've created. They've created another hierarchy. They've created another God. There's a disintegration that's taking place within the kingdom. And what else is going to happen? There really isn't anything else that the king can do. Now, also instructive for us is that there's a solution to the problem. There's a redemption of the problem, and that is we're going to bring in others who will come in and who will put this thing at the top. And these others that come in are the ones who don't have something that they're putting at as higher. They don't have something that they value higher. Now, it could be, and in this situation it is, not that they are necessarily better people. It's that they don't have anything. So therefore, they don't have anything that they're valuing higher. Now, does this mean that God's kingdom is revolutionary from the standpoint of God takes all the things that are weak and he says, this is what we should be celebrating? Does he take all the things that are marginal and say, this is really what's at the top of the hierarchy?
Well, I think obviously in the parable, that's not exactly what happens, and there's still somebody who gets excluded
Right.
and things of this sort.
Right. And so when we look at our culture, what we find is that our culture is revolutionary from the standpoint that it wants to take all the things that are traditionally at the top of the hierarchy, and it wants to turn that on its head, and it wants to elevate the things that aren't at the top of the hierarchy. So rather than viewing strength as good, we should view weakness as good. Rather than viewing beauty as good, we should view ugliness as good. There's that aspect to it. That's not the way that God actually works within the kingdom. He takes these things that aren't, and he actually turns them into things that are. So when we have a picture of these people being invited into the wedding feast and being clothed, that's actually a picture of glorification. And what it means is that there's a transformation of the people. When you get brought into the wedding feast, you're being brought into the union of the value system of the hierarchy of God with his people. That's what's happening. And when that happens, you're going to be transformed. It's not that God is going to change and say, well, weakness is now better than strength, and ignorance is better than knowledge, and foolishness is better than wisdom. That's not what God's going to do. What God's going to do is take those people who are weak and not beautiful and ignorant and foolish, and he's going to transform them. And he's going to make them into those things. And the problem is that if you demand to not be transformed, then the result is that you're actually not enjoying the marriage supper, right? So have you ever heard anybody look at this and think it kind of unfair that this guy gets thrown out for not wearing the right clothes? Have you ever heard that interpretation by anybody?
I haven't heard that interpretation.
Okay. I've talked to people about it, and a lot of times these exclusionary parts of these parables, a lot of people find those unpleasant. Well, I don't like how this guy gets, it seems unfair for God. It seems harsh for God to judge us. But what's really taking place here is the marriage supper is the transformation of people. And if you're refusing to be transformed, you're actually refusing participation in the marriage supper. And if you refuse participation, then you'll be excluded, because that's the nature of refusing participation, right? You're excluding yourself, and that's being ratified by God, who's saying, okay, I'll take your decision not to be a part of this, and I'll say, okay, that's your decision.